Well, hi there again, everyone. This is Christine Worth, and welcome to Beach House 34's trial reading of the Steven Avery trial. We are on episode number 8 now, and today's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting. In the last episode, we heard from the pilot, Curtis Drum. He took investigators up into an airplane to look for Teresa's car. We also learned that Steven's place wasn't the first place that they told this pilot to fly to. Other properties all over were searched, as were ditches and back roads, etc. If they were so sure it was Steven, why wasn't his place the first place that they went to? We then heard from 2 of Teresa's customers that day. Well, customers, kind of. One customer was Steve Schmitz, and the other was, she wasn't really the customer. She was kind of the spokesperson, I guess, for the family is the best way to put that. Joellen Zipperer. They both say that when they ran into Teresa, she was polite, she was working, she's taking photos, and she drove away in her RAV4 when she was all done. Nothing unusual. But then there's George Zipperer, Joellen's husband. Now, he did not testify, but we found out that he was kind of an asshole when it came to people he didn't know who were on his property. So much so that even when the cops tried to call him later on to ask him some questions, he got super defensive. Why? Now, all of these folks were just the pregame, if you will. Today, we're actually moving into testimony from Teresa's ex-boyfriend, who just happened to insert himself deep into the search for Teresa. At the end of the last episode, if you remember, I mentioned something about including Kathleen Zellner's information and records that she had filed. If you watched the documentary on Netflix, especially Making a Murderer Part 2, you know that a very famous attorney, Kathleen Zellner, took over as Steven's post-conviction defense attorney. She claims she can prove that he was framed, and she went to great lengths to test and retest evidence. Of course, she had to request the evidence from the state, and that's if the state said, "Oh yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll give it to you so you can actually test this." And she even gave names of other suspects. So what you're going to hear is during this trial reading, as well as others, if I have the information from Kathleen to add, I'm going to tell you about the person on the stand based on what Kathleen dug up, not just what you're hearing in this episode or in this, how do I want to say that? Just in this singular testimony. I think you will be really surprised, probably even shocked, and maybe a little pissed, or a lot pissed. If you want to actually see all of the exhibits that I talk about, you can find these. I'm on YouTube and I'm on Patreon, and both of these places I show videos which have all of the exhibits, if I have access to the exhibits. I have a lot of them, not all of them. In both cases, you can go to youtube.com/beachhouse34, and you can also go to Patreon at patreon.com/beachhouse34. So let's get into the testimony of Ryan Hillegas today, who happens to be Teresa's ex-boyfriend. Now, we're still on the same day. So at this point, Joellen Zipperer has just left the stand. And then Attorney Kratz says, "State will call Ryan Hillegas, Your Honor." And then says, "Janet, has 27 been received?" And the clerk, who must be Janet, says, "Yes." Attorney Kratz says, "I move 28, Judge, although I'm quite certain it won't be received in its entirety, but to complete the record, I think that it needs to be." And the court says, "This is the last witness's written statement." Attorney Strang, attorney for Steven, says, "Yeah, it was just used to refresh recollection." And then Attorney Kratz, the prosecutor, says, just for the purposes that it was used, Judge." Attorney Strang then says, "I don't think it gets admitted, but the record is clear that it was used. It was Exhibit 28. And the court says, "So I'm not being asked to admit it, correct?" And Attorney Kratz says, not in its entirety. You are asked to receive it, not to admit." And the court says, "Very well, I will receive it." And the clerk says, please raise your right hand. And at this point, Ryan Hillegas is sworn in and asked to spell his last name. Attorney Kratz then says, you can back up just a little bit, Mr. Hillegas, since the microphone is certainly loud enough for you. And the direct examination begins. Mr. Hillegas, do you know a woman by the name of Teresa Halbach? Yes. How do you know Teresa? I guess she was a longtime friend. We had dated for 5 years or so, end of high school and early part of college. At some point, did you and Miss Halbach stop being boyfriend/girlfriend? Yes. Did you remain on friendly terms with her? Yes. How often would you speak with her? And maybe once every week, sometimes every couple, but definitely kept in touch every week or two. During the time period of October 2005, were you aware of Miss Halbach's living arrangements? Yes. And what were they, if you recall? She lived in a house with a friend of ours, Scott Blodorn. Scott was also a friend of yours, is that right? Yes. And was it your understanding that Scott and Teresa had any kind of romantic relationship? No, no romantic relationship. Just roommates? Just roommates. Mr. Hillegas, are you familiar with how close the residence that Teresa lived in was to her parents' house? Yes. Where was it? Her parents lived roughly a quarter-mile down the road. And you are also familiar with the vehicle that Teresa drove at the time? Yes. Could you tell us about that vehicle, please? It was a Toyota RAV4, a blue-green color, combination blue-green. I show you what's been received as exhibit number 5 is on the large screen. Is that both the photograph of Teresa Halbach and also her RAV4? Yes. Mr. Hillegas, when was the first time that you heard that your friend Teresa had gone missing? It was Thursday after Halloween, which would have made it the 3rd, I believe, of November then. And on November 3rd, can you tell the jury what you did, please? Yeah. In the afternoon, I believe it was, I'm going to say around 3 o'clock or so, Scott had called me and said that Teresa's dad had went over and asked if he had seen Teresa. And Scott called me and I went over to the house that afternoon. Basically tried digging up any information on where she might be. We started calling her friends. We found a list of her friends on her computer with all their numbers. So we started calling all of them to see if anybody had whereabouts. And then after that, we printed off her cell phone records off the internet just to see what calls she had made or other numbers of friends we could find on there. Let me just stop you at that point. Mr. Hillegas, finding her cell phone records, how does something like that occur? How did you do that? Well, there were a couple of us that tried figuring it out. Basically figured out her password and made up a username that worked and got into her phone records and printed it right off. Had you known at that time that she hadn't been seen since the 31st of October? Basically, I knew that she was missing. I didn't know she hadn't been seen by anybody, but I knew that she was missing or decided that she was missing at that point. After printing off or getting access to her cell phone records, I assume to her account through her cell phone provider, were you able to provide that information to law enforcement authorities? Yes. Did anybody wonder why you hacking into her account? Just saying. You said that you had called some people. What kinds of calls were you making? Well, we called all her friends and basically just said that, we haven't seen her and wondering whereabouts. None of those people really turned anything up for us. And then we had called a good list of, the last numbers she had called and numbers on her phone. Now, on the 3rd, by the way, that would be the first day that she had been reported missing. Is that your understanding? Yes. On the 3rd, were there other friends or other family members who were assisting you in the search effort? Yes. Yeah, it was me, Scott Blodorn, one of her girlfriends, Kelly Bitson, came over. I believe a little later, another friend named Lisa was over as well. About how long that evening did you work on this project? Well, for a good portion of the night, probably, I guess, until midnight, 1 o'clock. We were calling friends and other people we didn't get hold of and people that were finally returning calls later, better portion of the night. The next day, the 4th, Friday, the 4th of November, did you become again actively involved in the search for Teresa? Yes. Tell the jury what you did, please. Yeah, that afternoon, it was probably late morning, but I had talked to the family and they had arranged with the missing persons organization out of Appleton. They were printing up flyers, missing person flyers, and they just asked me if I could pick them up and arrange, how we could get them out. That was kind of the afternoon. I went and picked up the posters, probably early afternoon, noon, 1 o'clock. And when I had gotten back then to Teresa's house, there was a good number of family members and friends who were waiting to basically find out what they can do and go pass the flyers out. I will show you what's been received as exhibit number 10. Are these the missing person posters that you are talking about? Yes. About how many of those posters did you assist in not only having produced, but in distributing? I'm going to estimate, but probably, somewhere, I don't know, probably between 1,000 and 2,000, maybe 3,000. They were all over the place, I guess. Did you receive assistance from her employer, or at least one of her employers, Auto Trader Magazine, to handle the flyers? Just to get information from them. I never spoke with anybody from Auto Trader. Okay. An organization that did help you, though, and it's up in the top left-hand corner of this exhibit, is something called YES, Youth Educated in Safety. Is that right? Yes. This missing persons search organization, did they provide you with some technical and other assistance? Yes. The distribution efforts, that is, getting these posters out, who was in charge of that? I guess I was kind of the unofficial leader, coordinator of the effort, if you could call it that. How many people did you have to help? Well, when I got back to the house that day, there were, I'm estimating here, but probably between 30 and 45 people. That was on just the first afternoon when we handed them out. But then we had contacted truck stops and faxed flyers. We had people just stopping by throughout the day to pick up flyers, just to put them out anywhere we could. I know there were people out pretty late on Friday night and still putting up flyers and driving city to city. Did your efforts, Mr. Hillegas, include the media? A little bit, yes. And this information about the missing person, where she was last seen, and those kinds of things, was that distributed to the media, as far as you know? Yeah, and they had flyers too. So now, with you being whether you want to call it official or unofficial, being the coordinator of this citizen search effort on that Friday, that is, the day after Teresa was reported missing, what other efforts were being developed to try to find Teresa? Well, after Friday, and we had got the posters out basically kind of through the instruction of the YES Foundation and their recommendations. First, they wanted us to get flyers out and make as many people aware as we could, all about Teresa and that she was missing. After that, it was kind of to go a little more and basically to search. A Friday night, after the posters were done being handed out, we had gotten back, and me and Scott, for most of the night, decided we kind of planned a road search, I guess you could call it, where everybody got in their vehicles and drove certain parts of roads and maps that we had plotted out for them, just to make sure we covered everything. But so Friday night, we pretty much planned on an all-day road search that went on Saturday with volunteers again. Well, Friday night, you said that you were making some maps. How was that done? Satellite imagery off the internet mostly, otherwise just MapQuest. Maps of what? Maps of, the areas we wanted to search. We kind of blew up smaller portions so you could see the roads better and county highways out in the Manitowoc area near the Averys, any kind of county highway. Basically, we tried to cover everything from Hilbert to Green Bay, all the way to the lake, pretty much covering as much land as we could. Well, this was a citizen search effort. Is that right? Yes. In other words, family members and friends, and very much so just a citizen effort coordinated by you. Is that right? Yes. Let me ask you something, Mr. Hillegas. Why would you center or why would you direct some of your search efforts around the Avery property? Well, mostly for the fact that, the media had covered so much of it. All you heard about was around the Avery property. And I believe at that point, we had known that, her last kind of whereabouts were in that neck of the woods. So even as an untrained law enforcement officer, you knew to look for the last place she was seen alive. Is that right? Yes. Okay. It didn't strike you as being unfair to Mr. Steven Avery, did it? No. All right. Now, these physical searches, you said the road searches and things like that. How many people were involved in that effort? Well, throughout the day on Saturday, there were people kind of coming and going, people getting up, work late in the morning, still wanted to help. Estimate say probably Saturday's effort was a little bigger than Friday, probably between 80 and 110 people, I would guess. All right. So over 100 of Teresa's friends and family and relatives were gathered to look for her Saturday morning. Is that right? Yes. What time did you all convene and where did this happen? Everybody met at Teresa's house. I believe everybody was there early, probably 6:30. A good portion of them were there by about that. I would say between 6 and 7 is when everybody got there. Tell us about that morning. What happened that morning? Well, everybody pretty much met in the driveway. Me and Scott, by that point in the morning, had all the maps arranged, but we had a large map that we printed out with kind of smaller sectioned areas that we had printed smaller maps out for everybody to use. Basically had everybody line up and come in the back of the house. And they were to walk through. Once they got in the kitchen, we kind of gave them an assignment, groups of one car or two. We would give the same map to and have them all cover the same area to make sure all of the roads were all covered. But everybody had an assignment. When they were done with their assignment, pretty much instructed to call back and we would give them a new assigned area to cover, one that we hadn't sent any people to yet. Just kind of a grid search? Basically, yes. All right. Do you know Pam Sturm or her daughter Nicole Sturm? Yes. How do you know Pam and Nicole? I had met them Saturday morning. They showed up after the good majority of everybody else had left. But that was the first time I had met them. After then, the first wave, if you will, of citizens got their maps and went off to do their search. What did you and Pam Sturm discuss? Well, Pam had showed up after pretty much the whole group of everybody had already left to search in the morning. And we had a good, so many people. We had a good portion of everything that we had divvied up. Good portion of that was already handed out to other people. Wasn't much area left to search yet. And she just asked, basically came out and said, had anybody gone to the car yard yet, the Avery salvage yard? We just said no, that we hadn't been sending anybody in there. And she offered to, and she said that she would be willing to. And Attorney Buting then interrupts and says, objection, Your Honor, hearsay. And the court says, Mr. Kratz? Attorney Kratz then says, not offered for the truth, Judge. It's where Pam eventually goes. I can certainly go on to another question. I'm not inquiring any further into conversations. And the court says, assuming that witness is going to be testifying later, I will agree. I will allow it. And then Attorney Kratz continues. Before Pam left, then, to travel to the Avery salvage yard, was she provided a map or any other information? Yes, I gave her a map. What other information was she provided, if you know? I gave her a map about the area out there and how to get out there. Scott had borrowed his camera just in case they were to find something. Do you know what kind of camera it was? A digital camera. I don't know what brand. When you say provided them, who was with Pam? Pam and her daughter. Nicole? Nicole, yes. All right. Do you know about what time Pam and Nicole left then for the Avery property? I'm going to estimate, but I would probably say somewhere between 7:45 and 8 o'clock, maybe. Sometime later that day, without telling us the words or what you heard, but did you hear some results of what Pam and Nicole Sturm had found out at the location? Yes. Even after Pam and Nicole's discovery, later on the 5th, did you and other citizens remain involved in search efforts? Yes. Can you describe those for the jury, please? Well, the car search on Saturday went all day, pretty much into the night again. And Saturday night, then, once everybody was done searching, we met back at the house and started planning our next endeavor to go on, I guess you could say. Let me just stop you. After the SUV was found, in this case, you kept searching. You kept your search efforts going? Yes. Why? Well, we hadn't found Teresa. Do you remember what locations your citizens searched for Teresa? Yeah, we went through all the cities, neighboring cities around Manitowoc County. Sunday, we had started doing fields and parks and ditches next to the highways, any place that I guess something could or somebody could be put and, not be visibly seen. But Sunday, we started doing actual walkthroughs of land and property near the Averys. It's a hard question, Ryan, but were you looking for Teresa's body? Is that right? Yes. Did you continue to receive technical assistance in assigning citizens to this effort? Yes. Who did you get assistance from? Well, basically, the Yes Foundation again. We just took any advice from them that we could, since Jay Breyer, who was, I guess, the leader of it, or the guy who runs it, he had seemed to have a lot of experience in missing person cases. Did you personally proceed near the Avery salvage property, and did you engage in searches of that area? Yes. Do you remember where you looked around there? Yes. Just briefly. Yeah, we did like Maribel County Park is near there. We did some private or public land that was pretty much adjacent to Avery property, but behind it all, any field somewhere around there that were outside the police bounds that we could get to. Basically, we searched. Mr. Hillegas, was this all before human remains were found on the Avery property itself? I believe so, yes. After you learned, I assume you learned at some point that human bones and human remains were found. Is that right? Yes. After that point, did you continue with your search efforts or did you call them off? No, we called the search off then. Attorney Kratz says that's all I have of Mr. Hillegas, Judge. Thank you. The court says, all right, I think at this time we will take our afternoon break. We'll come back in 15 minutes. And then the jury leaves and they are not present, and the court tells the attorneys 10-3 counsel. And Attorney Kratz says, thank you, Judge. And at this point, the recess is taken. And then once everybody is back from their break, the jury is now present, and the court says, Mr. Buting, at this time, you may begin your cross-examination of the witness. Attorney Buting says, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hillegas, can you give me a little bit of background on how long you knew Teresa? Sure. I met Teresa, I believe, when I was a freshman in high school, and I have known her ever since. And did you grow up in the same general town then, I take it? She lived in St. John. I lived in Hilbert. We went to the same high school. And then you went off. How are you employed, by the way? I'm a registered nurse. And where are you working right now? In Milwaukee. At various hospitals? At Froedtert Hospital. Okay. And back in October of 2005, where were you working? I was currently unemployed. I had just finished school. Okay. So on October 31st, you were not working at all? That's correct. And where were you living? At home with my parents, which is in Hilbert. In Hilbert. Okay. Now, you said that you used to date Teresa kind of on and off. Or for how long were you on and how long were you off? Well, we dated for a total of 5 years, I think. We broke up 2 or 3 times in the middle for short periods, maybe for a month at a time. So when was the last time you would say when you broke up? 2001, I believe. Was that your initiative or hers? Just kind of a general understanding, kind of both of us. We were just going separate ways. So, okay. And after that time, did you have any interest in renewing that nature of that kind of a relationship with her? No. Now, Scott Blodorn was also a friend of yours, right? Yes. Was he back in October of 2005 your best friend? One of them, yes. Okay. When did he move in with Teresa? I don't know that. Well, was it less than a year? It was less than a year before that Halloween. 8 or 9 months sound about right? It might be. I guess I'm not sure. Okay. You have been over to that house before, I take it, right? Yes. What's the layout of the house? How is it set up? How was it set up back then? Well, Scott's room was upstairs, Teresa's was downstairs. It was kind of almost an understanding. All Scott's stuff was upstairs and Teresa's was downstairs. They kind of had it split, shared a kitchen and the bathroom. So they had sort of their own floors and separate bedroom on each floor? Yes. But they shared the kitchen and you said the bathroom. There was one bathroom they shared? Yes. So they would see each other frequently, presumably during the day. Is that a yes? Sure. Yes. Okay. And did you come over and visit Scott various times while he was living with Teresa? Yes. And did you spend time over there? Dinner, watching TV, or a movie or something? Occasionally, yes. Was it? Well, I take it then from when you say that you talked with her at least every other week or every week even? Yes. On the phone, or would you actually get together with her or what? Either on the phone or I would see her at the house when I would go visit Scott. Okay. So you were over there quite a bit during that last 6 months or so? I wouldn't say quite a bit. Once a week? Occasionally, once a week, maybe. Okay, okay. Over that time, would it be fair to say that you became accustomed with Teresa's habits and routines, generally? No, I wouldn't say that. Well, did you know, for instance, she was a homebody? Did she like to go out? She kind of did what she wanted. Sometimes I would go over there and, not see her the 3 times that I stopped that week. And the following week, I could go there and I would be there 3 nights in a row when she would be there every night. Just depended. Were you familiar with her circle of friends? Most of them, yes. For instance, she went to UW Green Bay, right? Yes. And she worked in Green Bay? Yes. So she had a lot of friends in Green Bay? Yes. And she would go out socializing with those friends, if you know? Yes. Did you ever go with her when she would socialize with that group of friends? When we were dating, yeah. She was in Green Bay the last 2 years when we were dating. So occasionally then I would go out with her and her friends, but other than that, not really. Would you say she was a sociable person generally? Yes. She liked to be around people? Yes. She liked to go to parties? Yes. Liked to go to bars? Yes. Particularly karaoke bars, I think, was one of her favorites. I believe so. Yes. Okay. And in 2005, were there times when you would also go out with her to those kinds of places, either parties or bars? I don't think I think the only bar, I maybe only went out with her once that whole year, probably just didn't share that with her. And do you know whether Scott ever went out with her to bars or parties? A few times. I don't believe it was too often. Okay. And when she would be home, do you know whether she would have dinner there or whether she would eat out? What did she do at home? Occasionally, she did both. Did she and Scott have dinner together? Not that I'm aware. I mean, maybe they sat down and ate a meal together, but so you are not that familiar with what the evening routine was, is what you're saying? No. Okay. Do you know whether it was unusual for her to be out overnight during those last 6 months or so. Occasionally she would. I know she would go to Green Bay and stay at a friend's house overnight. Okay, let me ask you about the weekend of October 29th and 30th. 29th being Saturday. Did you see her or talk with her that day? I don't believe I talked to her on Saturday. I don't think so. Okay. Did you talk with her or see her on Sunday? Yes. And where was that? At her house. And how did that come about? I had just stopped briefly. I was dropping something off for Scott, and she was sitting there at her computer. Do you know about what time that was? I don't know. I mean, are we talking morning, afternoon, night? I don't know. You don't remember at all? No. And she was just sitting at the computer? Yes. And did you talk to her at all? A little bit, yes. And now the night before, Saturday night, was sort of Halloween weekend. There would be parties, bar parties, house parties, whatever. Did you chit-chat at all, talk about that? On Sunday, we had just talked, and she had mentioned that she had a cowgirl hat, and she was going to dress up like a cowgirl. And that was pretty much the extent of it. This was, I'm sorry, Saturday or Sunday? A Sunday. Okay. Did she talk about having gone out the night before, Saturday night, at all? No. Do you know from any other information whether she did go out Saturday night? I don't know. Or Sunday night? I don't know that either. You said that you distributed 1,000 to 3,000 posters, roughly, and that she had all these friends and helping out, including friends in Green Bay calling. You called some friends, is that right? Yes. This was on November 3rd when you called the friends, right? That was Thursday. Yes. Yeah, Thursday. But you said none of those people were particularly helpful, giving you any information about her. Most of them hadn't seen her for a while. That's correct. With all those posters out, all that publicity, did anybody ever come forward and talk to you, tell you where Teresa was on Saturday night? No. October 29th? Not that I remember. So that night is an unknown in her life. Is that right? I don't know of what happened that night with her. Be fair to say that Teresa had a private side as well that you didn't know about? And no, I don't think so. I don't think she had a private side that I didn't know about. We were pretty open with each other. We talked a lot. Well, if she had gone out Saturday night with somebody or someplace and you know nothing about it, would that surprise you? Attorney Kratz then says, objection, relevance judge. The court says, Mr. Buting. Attorney Buting says, I will withdraw it. And the court says, very well. He then continues. So the last time you actually saw Teresa was Sunday? Yes. You never talked with her on the phone after that? No. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you never called her? No. Well, that's not correct. I did call her somewhere in the middle of the week, and I did not get an answer, and her voicemail box had said that it was full. Okay. Do you remember what day that was? No, I don't. Thursday, Wednesday? I called her on Thursday when I realized she was missing, but I believe I called her once earlier in the week. Okay. So when you first learned, you said it was Scott that came over. Did he come over or call you, or what did he? He called me. Called you and said that he wanted your assistance or what? He just called and said that Teresa's dad had come over to his work site and asked him if he had seen her recently. And Scott had called me on his way home just asking if I had talked to her, asking if I could come over and help. Now, you said that Scott's work site, what is that? Scott worked construction. I don't know where his work site was, but usually they did kind of local housework. Okay. Did you ask Scott if he had tried to call Teresa at all during the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? I don't know. May have called? Is that what you're saying? I don't know. Did you think that it was odd that 3 or 4 days had gone by without Scott coming forward and saying, where is she? No. That didn't strike you as odd at all? No. Why not? Well, they were kind of on differing schedules. Teresa worked for herself and Scott worked construction. So he would be up and out of the house by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. A lot of times I know Teresa didn't get up and go to work until 9 or 10. So did you know Scott's schedule? Fairly well, yes. But you didn't know where he was working. Is that what you were saying? I didn't know what site they were on that day. On any given day? On any given day, for that matter. Occasionally, I would know just from driving by and seeing him on the side of the road working on a house, but okay, what kind of construction did he do? Rough work, rough framing, rough carpenter? Yeah. Now, when you went over there to her house on Thursday, you said Scott had already found some kind of information. Or no, no. What did you do first? How did you start to gather information about who to call? I just started looking through all her records. She had filing cabinets set next to her computer, kind of her business workstation, I guess. Just started looking through the files, turned her computer on, and there was actually she had an icon that was named Teresa's Friends. Clicked on that, and her friends basically popped right up with phone numbers. Was this a laptop? It was. Okay. And what did you do first? You talked about going online with her phone records, or did you call friends first? Well, we got the phone list of her friends and started calling them. And I guess you could probably say it kind of all went down at the same time. We were calling friends. It was me and Scott, and Kelly Bitson was calling friends as well. And we were kind of working on getting her phone records at the same time. How soon did Kelly Bitson arrive? How long were you and Scott there together before she arrived? I'm going to estimate and say between 6, something like that. What's that? She arrived like 6 or 7, something like that. Yeah, she was there for a few hours after I got there, I believe. She was one of the first people, okay, that we called of her friends. Now, tell me about this online search. You tried calling her phone and it was full, right? Yes. Did you know her voicemail password? No. Did you ever, so you didn't call and listen to her voicemail at all? No. Never? No. Never did that day or before? No. Or since? Okay. And she had never shared her password with you for the online records either? No. So you just went online to Singular Wireless or whatever.com and just guessed her password. Well, me and Kelly Bitson had just kind of figured that it would be something relating to her sisters. I think it was their birthdays that got into it for us. I'm not exactly sure about what the password was, but you didn't know what her username was. No, I believe that automatically came up when you entered her phone number in. You just need the password. Okay. And that's the first time you ever tried to search her phone record or use that password? Yeah. Do you know if anybody else knew her voicemail password? I don't know that. Or if anybody else listened to her voicemails? I don't know that either. All right. By the time that Calumet County investigators arrived, I take it you guys were pretty concerned about Teresa's well-being, where she was? Yes. And you knew that it was important that you provide as much information, as accurate information as you could? Yes. Did the police interview you and Scott together, or did they put you in separate rooms when they talked to you? Or how did they do that? I believe we were in the same room. Okay. Now, did the investigators ask you any questions about the nature of your relationship with Teresa? Yeah. And they learned that you were a former boyfriend, stayed good friends with her? Well, I believe I just said that I was a friend of hers. I don't think I mentioned that I was an ex-boyfriend. Okay. And they didn't pursue that and ask if you had ever had anything more than a friendship. Is that what you're saying? I believe so. It came out eventually. I just didn't feel that it mattered. And at this point, it says court reporter coughing, so asked him to repeat. And the questioning continues. Let me try again. Ask it again, please. Did the police ever probe further and ask if you had the nature of your relationship with her beyond whether there was ever anything more than friendship. I don't think they really probed into that. I mean, I don't remember when it came out who was the one that mentioned that we used to date. Okay, but it wasn't talked about that night? I don't believe so. When they were trying to find out what was happening or what had happened to this missing person, right? Yeah. And if Scott was there with you, then did they ask Scott the nature of his relationship with Teresa? Yeah. Did they ask any kind of probing questions about whether he was ever intimately involved with her? Attorney Kratz then says, objection, relevance judge. Is this a Calumet County bias? That's my question. The court says, Mr. Buting. And Attorney Buting says, investigative biases are relevant no matter who is doing the investigation involved in the case. The court says, I don't know if this really falls under bias. I will allow the question. And the witness then says, please ask me again. And then Attorney Buting continues, did the investigators probe the nature of Scott's relationship at all to see, as to whether or not there was any kind of intimate relationship between the two of them? I don't believe they probed into it. I believe he just said that he was a roommate and a friend. Okay. So a single man living in a house with a single woman, but that was the extent of it. Just roommates? Yes. And as far as you knew, that was the extent of their relationship as well? Yes. Scott never told you otherwise? That's correct. Teresa never told you otherwise? That's correct as well. And your recollection is that you don't know when your former boyfriend status ever came up. It was sometime down several days later? That's correct. Wasn't like the next day? May have been, like I said. I don't know when it came up. Okay. So going to the next day for a minute. Now, let's just go to November 4th. You mentioned that, well, let me go back for a minute. You mentioned that you had this meeting sort of on Friday, on Thursday night, the 3rd. And that was you and Scott and Kelly. And is that it? Or do other friends come over? I believe her friend Lisa was over, but not until quite a bit later that night. Okay. And so the plan was made to contact this organization. Yes, the next day to make posters. No, actually, the family was in contact with yes. Okay. So that was something that came up later. Yes. On the 4th, after you had all these posters made up, you had another meeting that late afternoon or evening, Friday, to talk about where to go from here. Yeah, Friday night after the posters were done being handed out. Okay. And you said that you downloaded satellite images and maps and were kind of trying to figure out how to divide up different areas, right? Yes. And you were asked about why you directed any efforts toward the Avery area on direct by Mr. Kratz. Do you recall that? Yes. And I believe you said it was because the media had the information and the media was already seeming to focus on Mr. Avery. Is that right? I don't think it was Avery himself. I believe that it was just that we knew her last whereabouts were out in Manitowoc County. Okay. And had you seen any interviews with Mr. Avery at that point, or any news people coming down and talking to people on the Avery property? I don't know if I had seen any interviews. I guess I was out putting posters up most of the day. But you did know that by that time, the word was out in the media that the last known place, at least that they thought the last known place had been at the Averys, right? Yes. And so that would have been true for anybody's knowledge, not just yours, anybody watching the media. Yes. Now, the next morning, then, when you started dividing up things, Scott was with you, right? Yes. And was Scott helping to assign people different places? Yes. And when these Sturms arrived, you said that Scott had borrowed Pam Sturm a camera. Is that right? Yes. Had lent her, given her a camera? Yes. A digital camera? Yes. But he didn't give every one of those members Saturday morning a camera, did he? No. He just gave it to Pam Sturm, who he knew was going to go out to the Avery salvage yard? That's correct. The only person he gave a camera to, right? Yes. And during this entire missing person period, that is, before the RAV4 was found, did the police ever ask you for any kind of alibi for October 31st? No. They never asked your whereabouts whatsoever? I don't believe so. Okay. Anybody point blank ever ask you if you had any knowledge about her disappearance or were involved in it? I don't know if they did it like that, like they were accusing me, but of course, people asked me if I had talked to her or knew anything, and that's why I was there to help. Okay. And to your knowledge, did you ever hear the police ask Mr. Blodorn, Scott Blodorn, if he had an alibi for Monday, October 31st in the evening, late afternoon hours? I don't know that. So would it be fair to say that you weren't in any way treated like a suspect, that you could tell? That's correct. And even on the 5th and thereafter, when the search narrowed into the Avery's area and surrounding areas, the police actually let you through some checkpoints along with some other searchers, you leading them to come and search the area, right? Yes. Within the perimeter of the area around the Avery property that they had made off limits to the general public, right? Yes. And that was true of Scott as well? Yes. Attorney Buting then says, that's all I have. And the court says, any redirect. And the redirect is begun by Attorney Kratz. Just so we're clear, Mr. Hillegas, the area that you were allowed access to was the outside of the Avery property itself. In other words, the surrounding properties, not within the salvage property. Is that true? Yes. Attorney Kratz then says, that's all I have, Judge. Thank you. The court says, all right, you are excused. All right. So that was the testimony of Teresa's ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hillegas. And as promised, what we're going to do is now you're going to hear what Kathleen Zellner filed in 2017. And this is from the same document that, in case you were watching the show Making a Murderer in Part 2, there's this big scene where she goes in and she files this huge document, and it's actually documents upon documents upon documents. This is from that document. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by letting people know that, obviously this is a post-conviction. So we already know that he's been convicted. He's in jail. So, I hope that wasn't a spoiler alert for anybody. It shouldn't be. But just in case, that's what happened. And this is his post-conviction attorney, Kathleen Zellner. This document that she filed that you would have seen in the show is called a motion for post-conviction relief. And it was filed in 2017. And kind of in everyday terms, what it means was, of course, the attorney is speaking for the person who was convicted. Essentially means like, hey, judge, I know I was already convicted, but something was seriously messed up in my trial or there was new evidence. So I want you to look at this again and fix it. Okay. So here is the information regarding Ryan Hillegas that is within this document. In the table of contents, his name actually shows up 3 different times. One of them is Mr. Hillegas intentionally misled investigators. The next one is Mr. Hillegas accessed Miss Halbach's voice mailbox. And the third one is Mr. Hillegas's activities after Miss Halbach's death. So let's get into what was filed, because I know it might not make a whole lot of sense at first, but then I'll give you the explanation of it. And it says, James Kirby, Mr. James Kirby, and Steven Kirby, Mr. Steven Kirby. Mr. James Kirby and Mr. Steven Kirby are both licensed Illinois and Wisconsin investigators. Mr. James Kirby has interviewed over 35 witnesses in regard to the Halbach murder case. He has uncovered evidence of the abusive relationship between Miss Halbach and Mr. Hillegas. Mr. James Kirby has found evidence that Mr. Hillegas lied to law enforcement about the broken parking light in Miss Halbach's car. The next one where his name comes up is something entitled Other Witnesses' Suspicions. And in here, in number 84, it says trial defense counsel also pointed out that George Zipperer, Mr. Zipperer, was belligerent, while Mr. Avery was cooperative. Mr. Hillegas had no alibi. In a section entitled Failure of Law Enforcement to investigate Ms. Halbach's background to realize that she was at an elevated risk of becoming a victim of violence, it says Ms. Halbach, the victim in this case, could be considered to be at an elevated risk for becoming the victim of violence due to her prior abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Mr. Hillegas, and her business, which involved nude photography. Third-party advertisers began advertising Ms. Halbach's business as providing, quote, adult entertainment services, unquote, although there is no proof that Ms. Halbach herself chose to advertise her business as providing adult entertainment services. Her nude photography business led others to advertise her business as providing, quote, adult entertainment services. This is new. I never heard about this before. Interesting. In another section, with the title being Only One Person Meets the Requirements of Denny as a Third-Party Suspect with Motive, Opportunity, and a Connection to the Crime. Abusive History. Mr. Hillegas was Ms. Halbach's ex-boyfriend. Mr. Hillegas and Ms. Halbach knew each other since they were freshmen in high school and dated on and off for 5 years. Although Ms. Halbach and Mr. Hillegas were romantically involved during their high school and college years, they were no longer together in 2005. Although Ms. Halbach reported to friends that Mr. Hillegas continued to check her out despite being broken up for years. According to Mr. Pierce, a friend and colleague of Ms. Halbach had been in a verbally and physically abusive relationship prior to or during her internship with Mr. Pierce. Ms. Halbach interned with Mr. Pierce in 2003 during her senior year of college, when she was still involved with Mr. Hillegas. Jealousy was the motive. While Mr. Hillegas maintained an interest in Ms. Halbach, she was no longer romantically interested in him. Ms. Halbach became sexually involved with her housemate, Mr. Blodorn, in the months preceding her disappearance. Reportedly, Mr. Blodorn was also Mr. Hillegas's best friend. Mr. Hillegas committed perjury at trial when he described Ms. Halbach's relationship with Mr. Blodorn as platonic and never romantic or sexual in nature. Current post-conviction counsel's investigator, Mr. Stephen Kirby, attempted to interview Mr. Blodorn about false statements he had made to the police in 2005. Mr. Blodorn refused to sit for an interview with Mr. Stephen Kirby. But when he was told that current post-conviction counsel planned to name a suspect in Ms. Halbach's murder, Mr. Blodorn immediately blurted out, "You mean Ryan Hillegas?" Another point of jealousy for Mr. Hillegas might have been the fact that Ms. Halbach, as part of her business, took nude photographs of men and women, and this activity led her to become sexually involved with one of her clients, Mr. Check. Mr. Check was married to someone else at the time. Ms. Halbach kept the nude photographs that she had taken of Mr. Check and his then-wife in the bedroom of her residence, a home that Mr. Hillegas frequented and moved into after Ms. Halbach's death. Mr. Hillegas intentionally misled investigators. When Mr. Hillegas volunteered false information about when the parking light damage occurred, it raised red flags about his involvement in the murder and the effort to frame Mr. Avery. Certainly, Mr. Hillegas had no motive to frame Mr. Avery unless he himself murdered Ms. Halbach. It is difficult to imagine a much more compelling motive to frame Mr. Avery than the one possessed by the murderer of Ms. Halbach. The alleged motive presented by trial defense counsel that MCSD investigators were trying to derail Mr. Avery's civil rights lawsuit against them pales in comparison to the killer's motive to frame Mr. Avery. Mr. Hillegas intentionally diverted investigators by reporting that the damage to the driver's side bumper and parking light of Ms. Halbach's RAV4 occurred months before her disappearance, and that she had filed an insurance claim for the damage. Current post-conviction counsel, through its investigator, has confirmed that Ms. Halbach never filed an insurance claim for this damage to her vehicle, and further contends that the damage to Ms. Halbach's vehicle occurred after she left the Avery property on October 31st, 2005. The most reasonable explanation for Mr. Hillegas's intentional misleading of law enforcement regarding the damage to Ms. Halbach's parking light is that Mr. Hillegas wanted to divert attention from the parking light that was tossed in the rear cargo area of the RAV4 by the killer when he was trying to plant the car on Mr. Avery's property and inadvertently hit a post on Redant's property. Mr. Hillegas would not want the searchers looking for other pieces of the parking light on the Redant property because if those pieces were found, it would destroy the state's narrative that after the murder, the RAV4 never left the Avery property. If the narrative implicating Mr. Avery was refuted, the investigators might begin looking at more likely suspects such as Mr. Hillegas himself. Mr. Hillegas was a trained nurse but was unemployed in October and November 2005. He had no alibi for October 31st, 2005, the date Ms. Halbach was murdered, or the subsequent days when her body was burned and bones planted. Mr. Hillegas was never asked by law enforcement to provide an alibi for October 31st, 2005. Trial defense counsel failed to conduct any substantive investigation of Mr. Hillegas, choosing to name him as a potential suspect at one point, but failing to meet the requirements of Denny. Mr. Hillegas's cell phone records show significant gaps during time periods in question. On October 31st, 2005, there was a 6-hour gap, a time frame in which there were neither incoming nor outgoing calls, from 9:41 a.m. to 3:48 p.m. It is most likely that during this time frame, Ms. Halbach departed the Avery property, departed the Zipperer property, and was killed after she arrived home at approximately 3:40 to 3:50 p.m. Ms. Halbach's day planner indicated that she wanted to, quote, get Sarah's stuff from mom at about 3 p.m. and, quote, do biz paperwork at approximately 4:30 p.m. Also, on October 31st, there was an over 2-hour gap in Mr. Hillegas's phone records from 3:50 p.m. to 6:01 p.m. Mr. Hillegas's phone records have an over 17-hour gap from 7:47 p.m. on October 31st, 2005 to 1:31 p.m. on November 1st, 2005, during the time where Ms. Halbach's body was transported and burned. Subsequently, Mr. Hillegas had more suspicious gaps in calls. There was a 6-hour gap in phone activity on November 2nd, 2005, from 10:06 a.m. to 4:12 p.m., and a gap on November 3rd, 2005, from 7:31 p.m. to 8:10 p.m., the time when Mr. Avery reported seeing headlights on his property. His last call on November 3rd, 2005, was at 10:44 p.m. Mr. Hillegas did not make another call until 7:52 a.m. the next morning. On November 4th, from 4:15 to 7:25 p.m., Mr. Hillegas received 21 calls from an unidentified hidden phone number. It is reasonable to conclude that the calling party intentionally hid its phone number and may have been law enforcement. It is during this time period that Sergeant Colburn called dispatch to confirm the license plate on Ms. Halbach's car. Mr. Hillegas had access to Ms. Halbach's singular wireless account and knew her username and password, as evidenced by Mr. Hillegas's admission that he used her username and password to obtain her phone records after she went missing. Mr. Hillegas called Ms. Halbach's phone at 6:42 p.m. on November 1st, 2005. Mr. Hillegas has admitted that when he called on Thursday, November 1st, 2005, an automatic message played saying that Ms. Halbach's voicemail box was full. However, Mr. Hillegas's testimony is undermined by the fact that his call only lasted 4 seconds. By comparison, Mr. Avery's call, which also generated an automated message that the voicemail box was full, lasted 13 seconds, more than 3 times longer than Mr. Hillegas's call. Sometime after that call, and before the call of Mr. Pierce, when her voice mailbox was full again, the killer deleted voice messages. Scratches are visible on the back of Mr. Hillegas's left hand in footage taken prior to the discovery of the RAV4 on November 5th, 2005. Current post-conviction counsel's forensic pathologist, Dr. Bloom, has opined that Mr. Hillegas's injuries are consistent with scratches from fingernails. Dr. Bloom has confirmed that photographs of Ms. Halbach taken close to her death established that her fingernails were of adequate length to inflict such scratches on Mr. Hillegas's left hand. The most obvious motive for burning Ms. Halbach's body would be if the killer had a known and established relationship with Ms. Halbach, and his DNA was on her body from a struggle or rape. Additionally, the burning of the body would allow him to move or plant the bones and divert the suspicion away from himself, because he was likely to be a prime suspect due to his prior abusive relationship with Ms. Halbach. Mr. Avery would not need to risk detection by others by burning Ms. Halbach's body in an open pit 20 feet from his trailer. Mr. Avery could have crushed the vehicle and disposed of the body on the hundreds of acres surrounding his property. After hearing Ms. Halbach's voicemail was full, Mr. Hillegas, who had no trouble accessing Ms. Halbach's singular wireless account, would be able to delete some of her voicemails in order to prevent family and friends from becoming concerned by a full voice mailbox. Clearly, the killer would not want Ms. Halbach's voice mailbox to be full because friends and family calling her would become concerned about her well-being and contact the authorities. Mr. Hillegas was aware of Sheriff Poggle's intention to conduct aerial surveillance of the Avery and surrounding properties on November 4th, 2005, to search for Ms. Halbach's vehicle. Mr. Kratz admitted that the RAV4 was not visible in footage taken during the November 4th, 2005 aerial surveillance. After the flyover ended around 6 p.m. on November 4th, the killer drove Ms. Halbach's vehicle to the southeast corner of the Avery property. A new witness describes seeing a vehicle similar to Ms. Halbach's RAV4, followed by a white Jeep, enter the Redant Pit from Jambo Creek Road using an access road immediately south of his house. Only the white Jeep returned. In the days following Ms. Halbach's disappearance, Mr. Hillegas spearheaded the citizen search for Ms. Halbach. Mr. Hillegas misrepresented his identity when he became the leader of the search. Mr. Hillegas continued to misrepresent his true identity, as evidenced by Wisconsin Department of Justice report of November 16, 2005, in which he was still described as, quote, Ryan Hillegas, unquote, and, quote, a very close friend of Teresa's, unquote. At that time, Mr. Hillegas provided addresses for where Ms. Halbach donated blood and plasma and addresses of her doctors, including a cardiologist, an OBGYN, and a dermatologist. Mr. Hillegas also provided a phone number for Ms. Halbach's pharmacy. So Ryan used a different name for weeks. So as to what? Not draw attention to who he really was? And, if his friend Scott was with him, Scott would have known full well that Ryan wasn't using his real name. Why would Ryan use a different name? Why would Scott just go along with it? And this whole thing about donating blood and plasma and the addresses of doctors and shit, this is creepy as hell. I've been married for years, and my own husband wouldn't know these things unless he just flat out asked me. This is weird, creepy, weird. Mr. Hillegas made maps for searches and directed volunteers as to where they should be looking for Ms. Halbach. He also made a hand-drawn sketch of his investigation, noting that he found a condom wrapper on the corner of the lot by the first house on Jambo Creek Road. Mr. Hillegas directed Pam to search the Avery property and gave her the phone number of the direct line to Manitowoc Sheriff's Department in case she found anything. Mr. Hillegas gave other search parties only maps, but he gave Pam a camera in anticipation that she would be the one to find the RAV4. After Miss Halbach's death, and despite his prior abusive relationship with her, Mr. Hillegas moved into the house shared by Mr. Blodorn and Miss Halbach, while the searches were ongoing in order to maintain tighter control over investigators' access to Miss Halbach's belongings and home. Mr. Hillegas was present almost every time investigators entered Miss Halbach's home, even months after Miss Halbach was killed, and frequently directed investigators to items of evidentiary value, such as her dirty clothing, including lingerie, the boxes for her phone and camera, and medical records. It is reasonable to conclude that he would also have had access to Miss Halbach's sub-key and given it to law enforcement to facilitate the sub-key being planted by Sergeant Colburn and Lieutenant Link. In addition to maintaining control over Miss Halbach's home and possessions, Mr. Hillegas personally searched property surrounding the Avery salvage yard and entered the salvage yard on multiple occasions. Even after November 5th, 2005, the police allowed Mr. Hillegas through checkpoints to come and search the area. On November 7th, 2005, Mr. Hillegas accessed the Avery property from 9:03 a.m. to 9:53 a.m. Mr. Hillegas made a second entry to the Avery property on November 7th, 2005, exiting the property at 4:28 p.m. Suspiciously, Mr. Hillegas never logged into the property when he entered the second time, meaning there is no way to know when he arrived or how long he had access to the property. This access to the salvage yard would give Mr. Hillegas opportunity to then plant the bones of Miss Halbach and her electronic devices on November 6th and 7th, now that the investigation was already focused on Mr. Avery. On at least one occasion, Mr. Hillegas also accessed the Avery and surrounding properties using a fake name. This would explain why, despite previous searches of the Avery and Janda burn barrels, bones were not discovered until November 8th, 2005. Mr. Hillegas was not asked to provide an alibi. When asked by police about his last interactions with Miss Halbach, Mr. Hillegas testified that on October 30th, 2005, he dropped something off for Miss Halbach at her house. Suspiciously, Mr. Hillegas does not recall what he delivered to Miss Halbach, nor can he remember anything about what time of day it was when he went to Miss Halbach's residence, even though this was supposedly the last time when he saw Miss Halbach alive. At first, Mr. Hillegas told law enforcement that he was just a friend of Miss Halbach's. Despite authorities eventually learning that Mr. Hillegas was Miss Halbach's ex-boyfriend, he testified that he was never treated like a suspect in any way. On the afternoon and evening of November 4th, 2005, Mr. Hillegas received 22 phone calls from a number or numbers with no identifiers. It is reasonable to conclude that law enforcement officers were calling Mr. Hillegas in connection with conducting an illegal search of the Avery salvage yard using Mr. Hillegas to access the property. In his pretrial hearing testimony, Mr. Hillegas stated that although he was not sure how many times he talked with Sheriff Poggle on November 4, 2005, they spoke at least once. Mr. Hillegas did not recall whether he had contact with investigator Wiegert on November 4, 2005. On November 5, 2005, with information obtained from law enforcement in 22 unrecorded calls on November 4, 2005, Mr. Hillegas directed Pam to search Avery's auto salvage. While Mr. Hillegas provided only maps and missing person posters to other citizen searchers, Mr. Hillegas provided Pam and her daughter Nicole, the only searchers allowed access to the Avery salvage yard, with a digital camera and Calumet County Sheriff Poggle's direct line. Clearly, Mr. Hillegas knew that Pam would discover Miss Halbach's vehicle. Pam located Miss Halbach's vehicle on the Avery salvage yard among 4,000 other vehicles on the 40 acres of uneven topography. Within 30 minutes of her arrival, a true statistical improbability. It is clear that Pam was provided information pertaining to the location of Miss Halbach's vehicle by Mr. Hillegas. Okay, so in plain English, what is Attorney Zellner saying here in this document? Well, first of all, she basically accuses Ryan Hillegas, Teresa's ex-boyfriend, of being way more of a suspicious character than the jury ever heard about. Her investigator found evidence that Teresa and Ryan had a rocky, even abusive relationship, verbal and physical. And even though they'd broken up, he still checked up on her. In other words, he was a jealous ex-boyfriend. He couldn't let go. She was seeing other people, even a roommate who was Ryan's best friend. And Zellner said that Ryan Hillegas lied in court about this relationship and tried to make it sound platonic when he knew damn well it wasn't. Ryan's pride was probably bruised, which gives him motive. Now, we haven't gotten yet to the testimony about the broken headlight, but because Ryan is involved, here's where this will make sense as you continue to listen. Ryan told the police a bullshit story, essentially, about Teresa's car having had a broken parking light from months before and that she had filed an insurance claim. But Zellner's team said that this was a lie. There was absolutely no claim filed. Why does this matter? Well, because if that light broke while the car was being planted on the Avery property, Ryan Hillegas would not want the police finding, a piece of this plastic or something on the Avery property, which means that it would show that, yes, it actually happened on the property, and he lied about what he had said. Another big one is that he had no alibi. His phone records have hours-long gaps on the day that Teresa disappeared and the days that her body was burned. He never gave an alibi for Halloween or even the days afterwards. He was also the leader of the volunteer search party, the ex-boyfriend who organized the maps, who told people where to look. He gives one cousin, Pam Sturm, who we'll hear from next, the sheriff's private line and then gave her a camera. And lo and behold, she finds this vehicle 30 minutes in a junkyard of 4,000 cars. The odds of that are astronomical. It's almost like he knew exactly where it was because he had put it there. The other item was that in Teresa's house, he basically had control of everything. After Teresa died, Ryan moved into her house. I mean, that's just freaking creepy anyway. It's the same house that she shared with the guy that she was seeing. And then whenever cops came by to go through all of her stuff, he was there. He controlled who saw what. I kind of, in the back of my mind, doesn't it make you wonder too, what Teresa's roommate / relationship, whatever, the guy that was in the house with Teresa, is he still there with Ryan? And if he has these same thoughts, is he sleeping with one eye open? You know what I mean? And then there's the scratches. Zellner's pathologist said that he had visible scratches on his hand before the car was found. Teresa had long fingernails. She fought back. Lastly, the hidden phone calls. Ryan received tons of these phone calls that were untraceable. They were from these hidden numbers, and they arrived to his phone the night before Teresa's car was found. Zellner believes that the cops were feeding him information or coordinating the planting of evidence to pin it on Avery. Because remember, way at the beginning, right, before the very first episode 1, we spoke about how this timing was really convenient. That Steven Avery had spent all of these years in jail. He was wrongly convicted. It was discovered he was wrongly convicted. He turned around and he sued the county and the sheriff's office and everything else. I don't remember all who it was, but he was suing them for $34 million, I believe it was. They've got a motive too, right? The big picture is that Zellner is pretty much telling the court, look, we have a jealous, controlling ex-boyfriend who has no alibi. He has proven lies. He's got these scratches on his hand. He has insider access to Teresa's house and the crime scene. And yet he was never treated as a suspect. I mean, he just testified to that. And I know a couple of times I've brought up I've talked about this in other episodes about the Denny rule. If Zellner is right, his actions make him the perfect Denny suspect. And in other words, this is a third party, a different person with motive, opportunity, and a link to the crime, which could definitely blow up Avery's original conviction. Knowing all of this, after reading through his testimony, first time I've ever read through his testimony, first time I've actually read through these Zellner documents, this really freaking pisses me off. You've got a woman who's already gone, right? And the one guy who should have been the first name on the list, the first name, they always look at the people closest to the victim, do they not? The one guy that should have been the first name on the list basically got to play detective. He got to coordinate the search. He was able to steer the story. Never was pressed about his relationship with Teresa or even asked about an alibi. I mean, what the hell? Really? In the next episode, we will hear from Pam Sturm, the one who found Teresa's Toyota RAV4 at the Avery property. So we'll get to that next. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all of you. We will talk soon. Bye for now.